best bouncy buttons in the series. Now, I thought that Riddle School 5 was a pretty good ending for Riddle School. Maybe not the greatest ending, but still a pretty good one, and it kind of surprised me that people were still asking for a 6th game. And I didn't really know how that was supposed to work until sometime later when I had this idea for a way to continue, and that idea was, what if, while Phil and Diz and everyone are returning to Earth, they get abducted? Not by aliens this time, but by Area 51, or at least an equivalent to Area 51. And that idea worked really well to me because there's the whole Area 51 idea of an alien crashing down in Roswell, and that alien ship being taken in for research, or something along those lines. And so because Diz is a stereotypical alien and he's flying a spaceship towards Earth, like, of course that would happen. It only seemed obvious. So I tried to take this idea as far as I could, and it became this game. But this game was going to be the first part of a 5-part series, and the other 4 parts that I had in mind didn't work out. Eventually I did make a Riddle Transfer 2, but it didn't follow any of the original plans that I had, or at least not most of them. But I'll probably go into that more whenever we actually get into Riddle Transfer 2, because that's where it's relevant. But yeah, I really liked the idea of an Area 51-based game, even though it's called Zone 5.1, because I think Area 51 or Area 52 is a bit too, like, it's not original enough or subtle enough. And this effect, I kind of wish that this effect wasn't such a heavy, graphically intensive filter, because right here on this screen, as soon as the ship comes into the view, it gets so frame-droppy. But whatever. Here's Zone 5.1. I just thought this would be a great opportunity to introduce a lot of interesting creatures that you could talk to, potentially. And I thought it would also be cool to bring the flying pig gag back, with actually talking to the flying pig. Like this visual gag. This opening sequence took 2 weeks to make, which is also, interestingly enough, how long the second game took to make. Well, the second game of the Riddle School series and the Riddle Transfer series. I think both of those took 2 weeks. And, at this point, I feel like the Riddle School series was kind of becoming repetitive. Like, you always start in one room, and you learn how to escape that one room, and then the rest of the series is open, or the rest of the game is opened up to you, more or less. But I figured that this would be a good way to kind of ease people into this new story, is having it not be completely original. So this game was kind of designed in mind with being kind of a mix between Riddle School 3 and 5, which are the 2 favorites, or were at the time. This poster has my friend's caricature avatar Karsh on it, who is also in the Face On book in Riddle School 3, and here's the monkey doll. There are lots of monkey dolls in this game. I remember at some point, this wasn't going to be a Riddle Transfer plan, but I had this idea to maybe have a plot twist where the monkey dolls were evil and alive, and it didn't make any sense, but I thought it was funny. Here's Television, which was not going to have any plot significance at first, but then it became plot significant in the second game. Oh yeah, and I kind of forgot. Well, if you click on this beforehand, before using the flusher on it, then Phil has this animation where he's trying to reach for the dial pad. I have no idea how he sees it, but just work with me here. There's no way for him to see it from that side of the room, is what I mean. There must be, like, maybe... No? Well, he wouldn't be using that mirror. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. This game has plenty of things that just don't make sense. I like this gag here, the not empty box, where if you open it, it's an empty box. These papers, you can click on them, and you have to click on them in order to proceed. And they don't have any indication that you can click on them, which I kind of feel bad about, because everything else has some kind of description over it whenever you roll the mouse over. but these don't. And it gets people stuck, understandably. So I wish that I could go back and fix that, but at least it's the only time that something like that happens. This is Goatman. Goatman, if you click here, it says, the hyphen makes it look like a Newgrounds username, but that would just be absurd. Goatman is, well, he's Graham Nordell, I think is how you pronounce his real name, I don't really know, but he made the Return to Riddle School fan game remake of the first game that released on the same day as Riddle Transfer 2, being the 10th year anniversary of Riddle School. And he also made this goat character, which starred in a couple of animations of his called, like, well, one of them was about the goat eating a mushroom, and the other one was Goat 51, which was about the goat just kind of happening upon Area 51. And whenever I discovered that existed after starting this game, I thought it was the perfect opportunity to use this character, and also because Goatman is the name of a cryptid, being a mythical creature. It didn't look anything like this is Goatman's character, but it just seemed like a really fun idea, and it just worked perfectly. And this blackboard, it has references to Goat 51. This No Way Out sign is a reference to Goat 51. It's an animation that I recommend checking out because I think it's funny. Elevator key. I don't remember the most efficient way to get through this game anymore. I used to have it all figured out, but I think that generally the most effective way is to start from the bottom and work your way up. This is the guard door. It's kind of a running theme in the Riddle School games to have one final obstacle before you can reach the final rooms. And in most of the games it's Chubb. In Riddle School 5 it's Oswald the monster. And in this one I wanted to try to come up with something more interesting than that, but I didn't know what to do. And then Psychosis 91 said something that inspired the guard door. I don't remember what he said, but he's also the one who had the idea for the steak with legs whenever I needed an idea for how to make a steak look like it was alive in Riddle School 5. Here's Messy, the mock mess monster. It was fun trying to come up with interesting names for existing cryptids, but making them original. And I liked the idea of making it messy and having a really upset Loch Ness monster who has a funny hat. Well, it's not a particularly funny hat, but it's just funny that he's wearing it. Oh, this elevator, by the way, took forever to animate because it had to be animated going up and down, and for some reason, like, the doors didn't align properly with the perspective, and I had to fix that, and it was a hassle, and I don't remember how long that took. I want to say that the elevator just by itself took about a week, which it doesn't seem like it would take that long, but it did. Hello, Fred. Fred's confinement chamber is based on the Riddle School 3 bathroom, and I think it uses the exact same urinal. I'm going to use the power door for the card doors. This screen also a reference to Riddle School 3 because this is the game that Mr. Potato was playing. And now, because I have my walkthrough next to me, I know that the answer to this is... there you go. That's how you solve that puzzle. And I wanted to use this flusher again for something, because I like when games have multiple uses for an object for a puzzle. And it just seemed to work well for this. The only way to free Messy was by flushing him. It had to be done. Smiley face. I like the sliding puzzle. It is really difficult if you don't know what you're doing, and I just happened to figure out a really fast way to do it at some point. But, I thought whenever I was making some of these blocks the same, like this one and this one are the same, these two are the same, these two are the same, I thought that by doing that I was making it easier, but it turns out that I was making it harder that way, so... if you figure out that this is the path that you have to use, then it becomes maybe slightly easier, but still difficult. Oh yeah, wait a minute. Need to talk to the negotiable snowman first. I love that name. I mean, maybe it's in bad taste for me to say that I like things that I make, but I really like that negotiable snowman name, and then his nickname is Yeddy. Y-E-D-D-Y. Also love the Learning to Shave board game, because I don't know why that would exist, but you've got an ice place here. I figured since I'm sort of like Phil, and Phil, like me, would love puns, then all the other characters would have to hate puns, because that's just how you get the best reactions. You have to talk to Yeti and use this line of dialogue right here in order to help him with his hair. Otherwise, you can't talk to Smiley and get her hairspray. That's who we're going to talk to next. Hello, Smiley. I felt like it was entirely necessary to give Smiley hair. And I also figured it would be a surprise for people who have gotten used to her design of not having hair. But I think it's a good change. And it took me a while to decide what it should look like. Like, it's here to indicate that she's a girl, because she didn't have many girly distinguishing features before, except for in Middle School 5 I finally gave her kind of eyelashes. But what I settled on was giving her a ponytail, and technically this, like, it's brown hair, but it's a really dark shade of yellow. So, because she's a yellow character, it made sense to me for her sudden grown hair to be a really dark shade of yellow. The code for her dial pad is 51333. It's not quite 1831, but it's a sort of smiley-looking number to me, at least. And then we get the hairspray. But the 3 is missing. Smiley Sunday. Her her last name was not originally planned. I had to come up with that for this game, because I thought that it didn't make really much sense for the characters to have their names above their doors without giving them last names. So I came up with the names of Zach Kelvin, Smiley Sunday, and Fred Whistler, and that took forever to do. I think Smiley took the longest, and maybe Fred took the second longest, unless I got those mixed up. But like, Zach was the easiest, and it still took forever to come up with his name of being Kelvin. Also, this background here, this wallpaper, it is a red sky, and the last song in Riddle Transfer 2, in the climactic sequence at the end, is called Red Sky, which is sort of based on the main theme of Riddle School 3, which happens to be Blue Sky by Paragon X9, and I figured that by making the top floor of this building a red sky wallpaper, it was supposed to be foreshadowing, but that's the most obscure possible foreshadowing ever, so nobody was going to get it, but I wanted to use the theme anyways. Zach tells you what the puzzle is to his door. I don't know why he overcomplicates things. He's kind of enjoying life in a really dry, sarcastic way now that he has a personality. I think that maybe whenever his head started burning, instead of him being shivery all the time, he was finally able to focus on his personality, and now we know what it is. That's kind of my mentality behind it, but his code is just 12345. And it was written on that side of the door. The reason that the characters know their door codes, and you don't have to go to all the effort of doing something else in a different room or something to find the codes, is I kind of felt at the time that I made this that it was silly when point-and-click adventure games had puzzles to find a code, when if you already know what the code is, you can just put it in and then skip a whole bunch of puzzles. So I figured that there was less to skip if the way that you find the code is just in the same room as where you put the code. Also monkey dolls. Pile of monkey dolls. Alright, so I've got the hairspray. I should probably use this hairspray, although I'm gonna... Here's the chlorophyll returning. I didn't know what the chlorophyll was supposed to be in Riddle School 3, but I decided that it was liquefied grass. And, that seemed to fit perfectly well with Goatman. I like this effect too. This took a while to figure out, but yeah, I like the effect of just a curved line to represent the hose. And it was the only time in this series that I ever tried to set up an item that you have to press in 2 different locations to use. Now let's talk to Yeti again. Need to get the hat on the bottom floor, too. Hairspray. Now, if you look really closely during this part, then you can see him throw by a... Okay, well, it went by really fast, but one of the objects that was thrown by was a statue of one of the characters in VVVVVV, the game by Terry Kavanagh. And, just a fun reference because I was playing that game a whole lot at the time. Hat. Now I think, yeah, I'm going to use this here. Kind of this, like, I think this is pretty similar to the Riddle School 3 puzzle of getting the keyboard key and using that on the machine, but I figured it was cool to have an actual 3 with a dice block. Dice block is what they're called in Mario Party, so never mind. Right. Gonna talk to Goatman next. I tried to make these different floors, like, they all look pretty much the same, so it gets confusing as to where everything is. But I tried to have some indication on each floor of what is in it, just by the color, so... Bottom floor... Well, the bottom floor I figured it would make sense for Messy to be on, because why else would you have a pool on any higher floors? And then this one's white, and it has Yeti on it, the snowy area. This is the middle floor, it's green, and so it has Big Toe in his foresty area, and it's also where the IFO deck is, because you wouldn't have a deck like this on any floor except for the first floor. Identified flying object ship deck. Okay, so we get the Daisy because this is the only Daisy we can get without stepping in the grass, because he loves his grass. That is the whole goat character, is that he loves grass. Daisy we bring to Zack because he is allergic to daisies and he bursts into flames. Some of these puzzles are really simple, but they're supposed to be along the lines of Riddle School 3 with its fairly simple puzzles. I knew that I didn't want Zack entering rooms like Yeti's room with all the snow or the ice, and I wanted to restrict like certain things from happening, so I figured that a smoke detector was a reasonable way for him to not enter every room, because it would make alarms go off. We didn't talk to the Flying Pig, really, but one of the lines from the Flying Pig is one that Phil says something like, "Pig, you and I are going to be great friends," afterwards. The pig makes a reference to Phil in the first game, saying something like, "I'm as free as a bird in a bird cage," which is the same line as the intro to Riddle School 1. And it's actually more applicable for the pig, because the pig is kind of like a bird, and it's in a cage, or it was a second ago. And I had this weird backstory for the Flying Pig that returned from Riddle School 3 and 5, where it lives on this cloud that never moves, or actually no, just the cloud next to it. I don't know, it was weird, but... Okay, moving on. We make a fancy hat with the feathers, because a regular top hat isn't fancy enough for Big Toe over here. Creature Communicator. I wanted to have at least one character that was uncharacteristically, like, posh. And this line here, "Get Bent Monkey Dude." I didn't know what Get Bent meant at the time. I only found out, like, way afterwards when someone mentioned that line was in the game, and they said, "Wow, why did you put that in?" And I was like, "Oh, what does it mean?" And then I looked it up, and it's more explicit than I thought it was. It's not a terrible thing to say, I guess, but it's still not great. And yeah, I don't know. This cutscene is direct reference to Riddle School 3's interaction with Mr. Reed whenever he gives you the bookmark. And I think I had a line in here somewhere. I don't know if it's still in the game, but I had him mention, like Big Toe, I had him mention something about he's using a calculator, but he'll give you the calculator for a fancy hat. But I don't know if that's still in the game or not. He might just give you a dial pad for seemingly no reason. And like that's kind of inconvenient, but oh well. Dial pad here, this is where Fred comes in. And then Fred has his Snoz puzzle that no one likes, but I like a lot. 51702 is what this says, it's just run together. And I think this was based on a puzzle in Professor Layton Curious Village. Had something kind of like this, but I decided to make it my own in a more humorous fashion. So 51702, is that it? Yeah. Okay, here's where he says it. Smiley and Zach are waiting for us on the bottom floor of this building. Except Zach... Well, that line changes depending on if Smiley is there or not. But Zach is not on the bottom floor of the building, he's just right there next to you. I think that I had planned for Zach to leave and go to the bottom floor of the building after you're finished using him, but then I decided against that because it made more sense for him to follow you around, and then I just forgot that he continues to follow you around whenever I added those lines in. I did kind of make this game and its different puzzles out of order, so there were just, over the course of 6 months, there were some things that I forgot about, and forgot to test. Also, the perspective with these characters doesn't really make sense here. That's one thing that I kind of had trouble with this game was sometimes the characters, if they're in one place and then they're moved closer to the screen, it didn't make sense. Like, they looked too big if they were realistically proportioned with the way that it was drawn. So, I don't know. It still looks weird, but... Here's the line Berserker, which is from Pico's school. There's a line in the intro in that game where a character says Berserker and then shoots everyone in the room. And because Riddle School was originally based on Pico's school, I figured it would be a nice... it would be nice to at least reference it once. Here's a timing puzzle. And I was happy with this because timing puzzles seem to be so rare in point-and-click adventure games. And some people insist that it's impossible to keep the guard door open, but I'm pretty sure that's not true. I'm pretty sure it's always possible to open it. And, game saves, like, 90% of the way through it, or more. The reason for that is, I didn't want to... Because the game is so non-linear for the most part, I didn't want it to be possible to save, and then accidentally mess up the saving system, so I decided to just play it safe and make it save in the one place where I knew for sure what items the character would have, or the player would have. If that made any sense at all, I'm not sure if it did, but... Final room of the game. And very obvious creature communicator-shaped peg into creature communicator-shaped hole. Music here is by Game Balance, who also made the music that is playing through most of the rest of the game, and it's a really good piece of music. And he also had this track on Newgrounds called Laser Tears of Science, which is still there, and I was going to use that, I think, for Riddle Transfer 5, but then ended up not using it, because there was just no place for it in Riddle Transfer 2, whenever I eventually made that, but still good. I recommend listening to it if you have not, which you probably haven't. And all those puzzles are done. Now, this whole thing with Diz and having his mind read, the general plot that I had in mind for this game was that Zone 51, or Zone 5.1, was its own organization, and they were they were taking Diz and learning about vision so that they could use it to destroy Earth themselves, which made no sense. And they also had this idea to take Diz and make him into Viz by like giving him red makeup, turning his skin red, and giving him like fake third and fourth arms, and giving him little fake stitches and stuff, and giving him glasses, like the Camino glasses or whatever those are called. And there was no reason to do that, but that was supposed to be the plot twist of the series, was that, like, Viz is alive, but no, he's not really alive, there's no way he could be alive, and it turns out it was Diz all along. And I figured that would be a really predictable twist if the series was going to take as long as I thought it would. Since this game took 6 months, I didn't want to spend 6 months for each game that I made. And I don't know, it just... the plans that I had didn't work out. But I'll explain that more at another time. Now, the twist of this game is that you get found out. Some alarm goes off somewhere. And then Diz runs off. This is supposed to paint him as a jerk, but not exactly. Like, he just escapes, or the plan that I had was he escapes because he has longer legs and therefore is able to escape, whereas the kids have shorter legs and they're unable to get through the same way. So Diz was just doing what he could, and then the kids have to find another way out. But then I had plans for Diz to kind of redeem himself later, like he knew that he was a jerk here, and then he saves Phil in the end, whenever Phil is in danger, something like that. And here's the cliffhanger that everyone was left with for 5 years. Now, if this game had a satisfying ending, and if it didn't say end of part 1 right here, I probably would have never made a sequel, because I was basically done with this series after I spent a year mulling over what the second game might be like, and then not succeeding with it, and then trying to move on to other things. But the fact that this game had a cliffhanger kind of weighed on my mind all those years, and so finally closing off the cliffhanger was a good feeling. One thing that I wanted to point out is that the font for the title of Riddle School is different from the font of the title in Riddle Transfer, because the Riddle School games all used Copperplate Gothic Bold, and it's a serif font, and I tried to remove the serifs and make it a sans serif font for Riddle Transfer to make it more modern, because it's a new thing. And then later I discovered that there is a font that's just like what I was looking for, called Media Gothic, which that font doesn't have numbers for some reason, but it was still very helpful to know that that font existed. And I think that's mostly it, so I'll see you in the next and final game, which has a history behind it, to be sure. Oh boy. Each new Riddle game that I made was released within 1 or 2 years of the one before it. But between Riddle Transfer 1 and 2 is a 5-year gap, and before we get to playing the game, I kind of wanted to explain what was going on with that gap. To summarize my original plans for Riddle Transfer to be a 5-part series, the first part is exactly what you saw in the previous video. I had in mind to make every game in the series before I released the first part, but then I got impatient and decided to release the first part anyways. What I forgot about is that by releasing this first part and having this setup, it was cementing my plans for the rest of the series, and I ended up not liking those plans very much. Part 2 was going to take place in the sewers, and it was just going to have all the characters going through the sewers. And I was trying to find ways of making this interesting. I didn't see any way to make it follow up the first part in any form or fashion that wouldn't be at least somewhat disappointing. And I didn't want to make a game that would be a disappointment to people. The only real idea that I had was maybe you could play as more than just Phil, you could play as the other characters, but there wasn't really a reason to do that. It just made the gameplay more inefficient, in my opinion, so I didn't end up doing that. And I spent a very long time just trying to think of anything to make it better than the previous game, and could come up with nothing. So I started over with a new idea for a second game, which was to play as Diz, who had just escaped in the previous game, and then I had in mind that he would get captured, or recaptured that is, and thrown into a little prison cell underground. And by doing this, it would basically become the same exact plot as the first Riddle transfer, just in a different setting and with a different character, and that seemed a little bit redundant to me. And not only that, but the way that I had the plot in mind, once you escaped as Diz, then he would just get recaptured again, rendering the entire game pointless story-wise. So that's something I didn't want to do either. I was trying to come up with a plot line for Riddle Transfer 2 for an entire year, I think, before I finally cancelled it along with the rest of the series, because the first game took 6 months. I didn't want to spend potentially 6 months or longer trying to make every other game in the series when all of them are free and I just wasn't enjoying myself. But to continue on, Riddle Transfer 3 was planned to be a simulation game that used elements of all the cancelled games that are mentioned in the Riddle School 5 special features, all the rejected Riddle games. So it was going to have like Riddle Company, Riddle Manor, Riddle Mansion, but I didn't like any of those games to begin with, and I was really only trying to make a game out of those abandoned ideas to please fans. That was just a really bad idea all around, and it made no sense. At the end of Riddle Transfer 3, there was going to be this character introduced named Shaw Delot, which was going to be an anagram for slow death, which didn't have any relevance, but it would be interesting. And with him was going to be revealed that Viz was alive. Wait a minute, how does that work? Because in Riddle School 5, Viz very clearly died, and it was impossible for him to come back. So how is he back? Well, the idea was that with his reveal, something would seem a little bit off. Like maybe he wouldn't have all 4 of his arms for some reason, and they would try to have an explanation for that, or he would have all 4 of his arms, but 2 of them would be limp, or something along those lines. Maybe he wouldn't have the stitches on his mouth. But then after that, like after the characters get a brief glimpse of this Viz character who is actually Diz, but the Zone 5.1 people made it to where he was brainwashed and he looked like Viz for some reason. It didn't actually have any purpose. They throw the characters into what was going to be Riddle Transfer 4, a prison school. Basically just a school with some prison security, and it wasn't actually going to be a school, it was going to be more like a dungeon, and so it was going to be really dingy. And I think the idea with that one was that all 4 of the characters would be in different classrooms, and then you would try to play as all of them to escape from their individual rooms before trying to escape the building. And then Shaw Delot would be the headmaster of the building, and then you'd find a way to stop him, but only temporarily. And I kind of liked the idea for that game, but not enough to go through with it. It ended up kind of playing into what Riddle Transfer 2 ended up being, which is a school that's been taken over by different security. But once they finally escaped this prison school, as I called it, there was going to be a Riddle Transfer 5, which was this indoor playground. And it was going to be this fancy-ish place with lots of stuff going on, and that was going to be the game that uses a tune called Laser Tears of Science. I didn't really have puzzle ideas for any of the games in the series. I was just hoping that I would kind of come up with them as I went along, which was not a very good plan on my part. And the one puzzle that I had in mind for Riddle Transfer 5 was for there to be this big slide, and you would find some tinfoil and use the tinfoil on the slide so that whenever you go down it, you would have less friction and slide right over a gap, just like fly over it. That would have been a little bit cryptic if I didn't drop a lot of hints for it, but it was a kind of fun idea. I just didn't really want to make an entire series just to get to that point, to do that one simple little puzzle. Then, in the end, you would discover Shaw Delot's plans to take Zack, and he has his new burning genes instead of his freezing genes from before, and he would make his own death ray, and the death ray would burn the Earth. That was Shaw Delot's plan all along for some reason. Like, maybe it was for science, I don't know, but there was no motivation behind it at all. The idea that I had for a climax was there would be this lava pit, a lot like the one in Riddle School 4, and then Phil would be thrown down into this lava pit, and he wouldn't die, he would just get very close to the bottom and then grab onto something, and then his friends would save him by doing these different puzzles. And in the end, when Diz is revealed to be Diz and not Viz, then save Phil himself as redemption for ditching everyone in the first game. Then I think Shawdalot would try to reach for Phil and then end up falling in the lava himself or something. I think that was kind of the purpose there. My idea for an ending was that Diz would finally fly back off into space, the kids would return home, and they would live their lives going through school again with no regrets, and Phil finally gets to college and everything is fine. And that's the part that I really wanted to make the most, but I didn't want to make a really substanceless, repetitive fan service series to get to that point. I was pretty much certain that I wasn't going to use these plans, so I revealed them on Newgrounds at the same time that I cancelled the series. I just had them kind of jointed into two different posts, the cancellation post and the post about all the discarded plans. And I figured if people knew that the series was cancelled, then they would stop asking for it. But that wasn't the case. People always ask for more. And eventually I got so fed up with it that, kind of on a whim, I deleted all of my files on my computer for Riddle School 1 through 5 and Riddle Transfer. And I think technically I might still have those files on some distant hard drive, but it's so far gone that I don't think I'll ever see it again. It's weird because I still kind of wanted to finish the story and wrap up the cliffhanger, but I wanted it less and less and less the more that people begged for it. I deleted those files because of the vocal minority of my fans who felt like I needed to make something for them instead of for myself. After that, I kind of wanted to distance myself from the Riddle School series as much as possible, and that kind of coincided with how I wanted to change my name from JonBro to something else anyway, so I just associated Riddle School with JonBro and left it behind while switching to this new Jonochrome name. And basically said, that's in a past life, I'm done with it now. But at the same time, I always kept using my JonBro Newgrounds account to respond to messages that I might have received about Riddle School, because I had this sort of lingering feeling that maybe I need to come back to it, like I had some unfinished business on Newgrounds to take care of, because there was that cliffhanger hanging over me. Flash forward about 4 years, when I have barely thought about Riddle School for a long time. I had a sudden motivation to right some wrongs with my life, to fix parts of my personality, and to change some things about myself that I just didn't like. And my reasons for this are explained in the special features of Riddle Transfer 2. And one of those wrongs that I wanted to make right was the cliffhanger at the end of Riddle Transfer, which made the series end on a really unsatisfying point. If Riddle Transfer didn't end in an unsatisfying way like that, I wouldn't have bothered making a sequel. The inspiration really kicked in whenever I realized that Riddle School's 10th anniversary was 3 weeks away, especially since I didn't want to spend longer than 3 weeks making another Riddle School game, since I was basically done with it. And around that same time, I found out that big YouTubers like the Diamond Minecart, Jacksepticeye, were playing the Riddle School games, and that blew my mind, because they've been not really relevant for a long time. All the stars aligned. There was no way that I could let myself not make this game for the 10th anniversary of Riddle School, and it is a miracle that it exists. So with that really long intro out of the way, let's begin the game. The main menu was the first thing that I did, and I figured it was the kind of constant of the series to have images of Phil on the left, buttons on the right, title on the top, and part of the reason that I wanted to make a whole new menu is because it was my only option. I deleted all the files for the other games, so I had to start from scratch. But I like how it looks. It's nice and fresh, and the quit button, what it does is actually one of the last things that I added in the game. There's a running gag in the series where if you press the quit button, it either does nothing or it does something stupid. For example, in Riddle School 4, you click it and it says "Quit Quitting" after a couple of times. And then the 5th game, you see a picture of Phil and he looks sad, you press quit and then he gets all angry and it's scary. And in this game, it actually quits. Which is something that I probably wouldn't have made it do if this wasn't the final game in the series. But I figured it was appropriate. I was thinking of making it do something else, like, I don't know, making Phil do a little dance or something, but this seemed like the option that was less effort and also more fitting for the final game. And then this opening, This part of the opening, I think, was added in after I decided to... or after the reveal of Quiz, because I wanted to reintroduce him as a character before just having him kind of randomly show up. Since he wasn't planned to be anything before this. Here's the first thing that I animated. All the artwork in this looked worse before I cleaned it up. I had a lot of really sloppy, fat line work all throughout this game, and went back and fixed it once it was near completion, because I didn't want it to look so much worse than the first Riddle transfer. But it was just what I had to do to make sure that the game got done, and then I was able to fix it, so I did. In the audio commentary of Toy Story 3, whenever I first saw that, the director's commentary, director Lee Unkrich described the beginning of Toy Story 3 as kind of like a kickoff point, where it doesn't take so long to get into this big backstory and slowly ease into the movie. It just starts off with a bang, because people have been waiting on that movie for 10 years, so they might as well just have it start right away. And I kind of wanted to do something like that with this game, because people have been waiting on it for 5 years. It might as well start with a bang, so I had the guards chase the kids. And it also works because my original plan was for the kids to be in the sewers and just kind of wander through them, but it didn't make sense that the guards wouldn't come in after them. They weren't that stupid to not follow them into the manhole. Also, this dog, the first or second draft of Riddle Transfer 2 from years ago, there was going to be a dog that looked just like this, that was going to be the size of Chub, holding up a sign that said woof, and that was going to be part of a puzzle. And this woof puzzle was based on a message that I received from someone named Abby Drew on Newgrounds. I don't remember what the message was, but I really wanted to use this idea for a puzzle of woof being 4003 whenever you look at it sideways. The woof was going to be on the wall, and it actually was at first, but that was too cryptic, so I made it its own piece of paper. And the coordinates here, the Riddle elementary coordinates of 39 and -77, are roughly the coordinates of the White House. So that's just a fun detail. Wait. There we go. And -77. This portal is just the same rainbow background as the main menu's background. I wanted the game to take place in Riddle Elementary School because it always kind of interested me to make sort of an Ocarina of Time Master Quest version of a game that I've already made. And I didn't want to just make another Riddle School 1, like a remake of it, for no good reason. I wanted there to be something to make it significant story-wise, so... And I also, like... One of the reasons that I never made Riddle School 4 into a full game is because I didn't want to make another game that just takes place in a normal school where all you do is escape. And the reason that I was able to make this is because it isn't just a normal school. Something changes it. Also, there's Phil's line of a decade of school. Thought it would be interesting to come back and give characters who never had dialogue some dialogue. So Miss Coffee has some. Richie didn't have much, but now he has more. And then Chub also never had much dialogue, but... Oh, and I remember wanting for the longest time for the kids to come back into the class and use "we got abducted by aliens" as an excuse for why they were absent. So I finally got to do that here, and it was really satisfying to get to use that terrible joke, but it was just too fitting. And here's Quiz's official introduction. He looked so much worse before I cleaned this up. Oh, I remember, you were the one with the blue text in that one cutscene. He's referring to the one in Riddle School 5, but he ended up being in a cutscene at the very beginning anyways, of this one. Now at this point, like, I made this game in a linear fashion for the most part. I didn't really make bits of it out of order. I just started with the start and went to the finish. And so, at this point, I was kind of expecting Quiz to be the bad guy. Even though he's really not that threatening of a bad guy. But at the time I didn't really care. I just wanted to make this, like, an interesting game. And so, whatever I could do to make the Riddle School 1 layout with different puzzles is what I did. And this puzzle with the green backpack and the paper bag was going to be for the Riddle Retold game that I was going to make a long time ago. The remake with no purpose. And that was going to involve Mr. Calm being on his behind his desk. You were going to be here, and the way that you would escape the room is you would just make a decoy of yourself and set it in your desk. Because he wouldn't let you leave, you have to be in your chair. But if he sees you in your chair, you might as well leave. And so I just changed that a little bit to make it a scanning system that detects whether or not you're in the seat, and it works well enough. Also, I wanted all the characters in this game to have some kind of a purpose. So, Fred's main purpose is really just to give you the backpack. Zach has a puzzle purpose later. Smiley becomes significant story-wise. And, Miss Coffee, she will have a puzzle. Most of this game is one puzzle, but I'm okay with that because it's a kind of complicated puzzle. Oh, and this. The Vote 5 poster, it's not here. Not because I don't care about 5, but because I just didn't feel like drawing it, and that's why Phil makes this joke here, and I wanted to bring back the I didn't trace drum set joke, but change it into an I didn't draw poster. This number here, the 241543903, is the number that you can search for on Google Images to find a bunch of people with their heads in freezers. Here's Richie. I figured it would be interesting to kind of write dialogue for him, because he seemed maybe a little bit rude in the first game, and so I worked with that. And this line where he says, "Do you collect buttons perchance?" Yeah, he doesn't seem like the kind of person who would collect buttons now, but since somehow the Riddle School 5 dream sequence of the characters accurately depicts the future to the point where Richie would probably collect buttons in high school, I don't know. Like, this series has never made total sense to me, and I kind of decided to embrace that it doesn't make total sense in this one, and also that it's kind of cliché. Like, just the whole plot of the series is kind of cliché. Oh yeah, and the Elmo's glue. I love that. Because Elmer's glue is what it's based on, but it's also based on the fact that in the Sam & Max series, Sam & Max Season 2 specifically, there's like Santa's Workshop has a Torture Me Elmer doll in it. And the Torture Me Elmer doll is, it was really funny to me, and so I figured mixing Torture Me Elmer and Elmo's glue would be funny, just both having the same joke but in different ways. Men's room. I always thought that the perspective in the first game for the men's room looked weird, so I changed that. And it took me this long to realize that the bathroom that I drew in the first game didn't have a mirror, which is just kind of weird. And then another thing that I wouldn't have done if this wasn't the last game in the series was finally have Phil look in the women's room. It had to be done. There was no way that I couldn't do this. And there was also no way that I couldn't make it something completely unexpected. What the floswad? Inside joke. And I thought for a while about what this room should have in it. Like, I thought that maybe it could be a futuristic room with a big machine in it or something, but that seemed almost too predictable because the series has had plenty of futuristic things in it anyways. And so I figured something really old with no technology whatsoever, except for maybe this light, was more unexpected. And then the gumball machine, I just threw this in here because, one, it was unexpected, and two, this was kind of like my go-to room for if I ran out of puzzle ideas anywhere else in the building, because I could put whatever I wanted to in here. So gumball machine, get the gumball. There's one cutscene where you see this gumball used, and in that cutscene, the gumball looks a little bit more purple than it does right now, but that's just, I mean, it used to be worse, and then I went back and made it more pinkish, but this puzzle is one of the ones that people get stuck on. The wolf and the lasers are the two that people get stuck on the most. And understandably so with this one. People think that you're supposed to short-circuit the lasers with the water, which you can't do. And then people think that you're supposed to maybe, like, get through the lasers because it says any human DNA passing through will be shot. So maybe you just, like, tuck your arms into your hoodie and then just kind of hop over, and maybe, or you would use the bucket to shield yourself or something, but none of those things work. And what you're supposed to do is look in your inventory for the one thing with human DNA, and use that to get the gun to shoot its own power source. And this was a puzzle idea that I had more or less for the second draft of Riddle Transfer, when it was going to be Diz escaping his own prison cell. That, if you look at the old screenshot for that game, it has the same kinds of lasers. I think the puzzle was going to be that you would find a shard of a mirror and use it to get the gun to reflect on itself, to try to shoot itself, but that didn't make total sense. Here's Chub. I started feeling bad for all the fat jokes in this series once I realized that fat shaming is a thing that exists in real life, and I decided to kind of make up for that by making Chub enjoy fat jokes. Like, he's totally cool with them. And that also makes sense with his mother being like, if Phil talks to Mrs. Munch in Riddle School 3, and he says, "You're fatter than the sun," she says, "I can live with that." It just runs in the family, I guess. And Mr. Munch, like, Mr. Munch is evil in Riddle School 4, but that's not really Mr. Munch, that's like an altered version of him. And his real personality is probably just fine. So, talk to Chub, and then the dollar that you gave him in Riddle School 1 comes back. Thought that would be kind of cool to do. I like the idea of items returning in the series, like, well, this is the same dollar, I assume, from the first game, and also earlier, the key card that you use at the beginning of this game is the same one that's at the end of Riddle Transfer 1. If you click on this smiley smudge, the famous or infamous smiley smudge, it reveals that Smiley was okay with it, and Phil probably didn't need to get in trouble and go to that class in the first place. Cookie machine is still broken. Considered doing something with it, but nah. Yeah, it looks a little bit more purple here than pink, but I'm not going to change it again. I already changed it once. Just bringing the dollar back. I also... One of the thoughts that I had sometime in the 5-year gap between Riddle Transfer 1 and 2 was to try to remake the first game, and maybe, like, as an HD thing, but that never lifted off the ground because I just didn't see any point in doing that. But I did draw one room of the game, and I used details from that room for this game. So, like, these windows are not new drawings, they're pretty old actually, but I decided that that and, like, the wall texture just brought those back. Okay, moving on to this creature. I just drew this creature knowing that I kind of wanted to have some sort of puzzle where you mislead him into putting eye drops in his eyes that are harmful to his eyes. And once I drew this character, later I decided to give him the name Nitwit, which is the same name as the person in Riddle School 5 who writes the note about Oswald needing live meat. So I didn't draw this guy with the intention of naming him Nitwit, but I decided to name him that to tie things together. So, Nitwit. This This fold-out thing is supposed to be both a joke on the fact that it's excessively long addition or division, long division problems, and also it's supposed to be a subtle porn magazine joke, because I'm learning from Rare Studios and their innuendos through all the Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong games and all that stuff. I'm learning. And, now let's make the coffee. I didn't know how to make coffee without a coffee machine, so I had to look that up to kind of figure out how this might work. I really wanted to add Miss Coffee as a puzzle element. Whenever I looked back at the first game and I saw her spinning the pointer really fast, not quite this fast, but it just looked like it could be something to use to cut something else. And so I made this animation before I had any idea what she was actually going to cut. And eventually I settled on an industrial eyedropper that can't be opened any other way. The perspective on this doesn't actually make total sense, but I don't really care, because that's the way that it works. Put the soap in, glue it together. The glue stick had to be a glue stick and not a glue bottle, because I didn't want it to be possible to put that liquid into the glue, or into the eyedropper. Excuse me. I wanted the hand soap to be the thing that goes in, so it was originally a bottle, and then I changed it to glue stick. And now I would like my division book back. No, I wouldn't. Put this here. You can also put the hand soap here, but it doesn't do anything. And that's supposed to be like part of the learning process for the puzzle, is that you realize that he knows this is a different container. Also, I learned when watching my brother-in-law play this game that one of the thoughts that he had was to throw coffee grounds into the guard monster's eye, but that didn't work, and so I decided to add in some dialogue later where he knows how to defend himself from that. Yeah, and then we just talked to him, and this was fun to animate. I remember that I had this thought also that Nitwit would be going to the bathroom to try to wash out his eye, and then he would just be here as kind of an Easter egg. But I ended up not doing that, because first of all, who would check? And secondly, this bathroom doesn't have any sinks that work, so that wouldn't work. And then thirdly, if he went over to this water fountain instead to try to, like, wash out his eye, then it would just look really awkward to animate, and I just didn't really feel like doing it, so he doesn't show up anywhere else, he just kind of leaves. As does Chub. Chub, who knows where he went, he probably went home. And let's go to the next cutscene, the really long cutscene. I had to have something to explain and close off all the different plot holes in the series. Not all of them, obviously, because some are just too wide open to patch, but I wanted to try to wrap up a whole lot of story points in one fell swoop, and the only way to really do that was with a long cutscene, and I decided that the way to make this long cutscene interesting would be to make it interactive, and so I had the idea of making a quiz, where Phil kind of interrogates Quiz with a quiz. And I wasn't sure exactly how this was going to work, but the way that I made it work was Phil just kind of manipulates Quiz in the same way that in Paper Mario, like, Tech, in the second Paper Mario, he, like, makes a quiz where he reveals all the answers to you without directly telling you things, if that made any sense. If you've played the game, you know what I'm talking about. But the correct answer is Diz. The answer that you're supposed to expect is Quiz, and then any answer works, unless it's very clearly wrong, so Nitwit is wrong. Viz is just here as a joke. I'm gonna guess Quiz, just to move along. And then any of these will give you different dialogue. Useless is the correct answer, so I'm gonna put that in. With his own invisible ears. Straight dialogue from Riddle School 5. making all this up as I go along, just like the whole series. Correct answer is just one. And Quiz says it's him, but it's not. You'll fail this quiz faster than your buddy Diz left you behind to die. Now, this was playing off of the whole... Everyone was expecting Diz... Or once everyone thought that Diz was evil, kind of, or at least a big jerk at the end of Riddle Transfer 1, and they didn't care what happened to him, I decided that maybe playing that off as not actually that big of a deal would be a nice way of kind of casting suspicion away from him in this game. I don't know. And I didn't know how to make this question work, aside from having Quiz just be really incompetent with his answers. So that's what I did. Who owns Zone 5.1? Quiz just gives up at this point, and then I was really happy with this. I guess this quiz just became fill in the blank. Really happy with that line. It's not much, but it's something that I just found clever once I thought of it. And here's the long explanation. Viz is dead. Diz rises the top command. Quiz is useless, so he doesn't inherit the top spot. But he wants this, he wants the top spot. And it's not that Quiz is evil, he's just misunderstood. He has this idea of wanting to be a leader, and then he doesn't know what being a leader means. And it's not that he wants to be a bad guy, or that he even wants to be a good guy necessarily, he just doesn't have any other concept of what it means. Also, this says there must have been years of studies done for the project to determine Earth to be evil. Another thing that I just kind of retconned out of nowhere, because it's implied in Riddle School 5 that all the Vision project ever did to determine Earth to be evil was set a time bomb outside of the elementary school, and then Phil walks out, and then they say, "Oh, it's evil!" and then they go and try to kill the whole planet. But that, in order for this story to work, I figured that Zone 5.1, being owned by Vision and being the first part of a really long process that determined Earth to be evil, made more sense. And, I also felt like maybe Phil escaping school was just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, instead of just being the only deciding factor. This is where Quiz has his own realizations about himself. I remember whenever I was considering Quiz to be straight up evil when making this, there was going to be some back and forth between him and Phil, where Phil says, "Let my friends free," and he says, "What good is school anyway? Didn't you used to hate it?" And then Quiz says, "Well, I don't," or no, Phil says, "Well, I don't hate it anymore." I don't know. It might have worked, but I prefer how this works now. All security measures now offline. I was kind of struggling to figure out how I was going to play out this cutscene to make it seem like it might be the end of the game, and also introduce a plot twist very soon. And the way I decided to make it work was just having something happen in the sky and then having the kids turn their heads, even though sound doesn't travel through space, but oh well, this is a video game. And the reveal. It's Diz! Now, people are confused by what the motivation behind Diz's being evil is, and they ask if he was always evil. My mentality with this is that he got really impatient with Project Vision taking forever, like with the Judge the Planet stuff, because presumably Zone 5.1 was built and the research was done there over years, and at that point, well, come on, just destroy the planet already. What's taking you so long? That was kind of my mindset with Diz finally kind of snapping and then wanting to take it all for himself, for pure cathartic destruction of all civilizations. And I don't know if that's the strongest motivation, but I figured if I was going to end this series with a stronger point than Riddle School 5 had, then I had to find a way for a character to be worse than Viz was. And Viz had at least some kind of morality system in mind when trying to destroy planets, even though it was really skewed and unfair. But Diz has no sense of morality. And I also had this idea for a twist where somehow Greg was evil, like Greg, the guy who sleeps all the time, because maybe it would have something to do with the dreams in Riddle School 5, but there was no way to make it work, so I just gave up on that, and Diz being the bad guy works a lot better. Because him being a jerk at the end of Riddle School 5, or Riddle Transfer 1, kind of served as foreshadowing for this in a way. And then Phil and Smiley being together was a very sudden decision. It was something that I didn't think was going to happen for a long time, but the reason it's sudden in the game is because it was a sudden decision for me. But I felt like it worked. Because I found that in real life, relationships can be very sudden. And sometimes maybe someone that you think is a friend turns out to be more than a friend. Also, during that cutscene, when Phil says something along the lines of, or no, Quiz says, like, do you have a plan? And Phil says, no, I don't, but we have to do something. That was a direct reflection of my own thoughts at the time, because I had no idea what I was going to do with this last part of the game. I had no plans. This puzzle is pretty much a straight ripoff of one from a game called Gretel and Hansel 2. I think that mine is a little easier, maybe, but yeah, it's kind of a puzzle from that game. And I wish that I hadn't copied it straight from that, but I mean, it's a good puzzle and I like it, so there we go. There's the quiz puzzle. I wanted this puzzle to be one that I could solve. There were ways of making it way harder, obviously. Like, I could have had all these, everything jumbled up completely, but I decided to have at least some semblance of the puzzle being together before you solve it. And then, I remember in the first Riddle Transfer, there was going to be a puzzle involving, whenever Phil is in his confinement chamber at the beginning, you would look at the television screen and then see the guard physically putting in the numbers for the dial pad. And I didn't end up using that because it seemed kind of unnecessary. But I always kind of wanted to have a puzzle where you look at a screen or something that has a sequence, and then you use that sequence for a code. And so in this case, the escape pod lights, I realized that whenever I was animating them flickering, I could use that as a puzzle. So it says EACCA, and then we use that over here. I also realized that almost every Riddle School game ends with using a key. The first game, second game, third game, fifth game, all of them end with basically the final item being a key. And so I figured, what better way to end the Riddle School series as a whole by using a key. I was going to have some kind of ammunition in this ship originally, and I was going to have some kind of puzzle involving keeping the Vision ship at bay, but this seemed like a much more logical choice whenever I had this idea. And it was a really big debate for me at first as to whether Quiz should hit the self-destruct button first or say take the escape pod first. I went with this first because once he touches the escape button and presses it down, that's a commitment. Like, he knows what's going to happen next, and there's no way for him to back out of it then. This is Quiz's sacrifice, his redemption for thinking of being evil. And it only made sense to me for him to go out this way, and for him to go out at all, because this was the way to ensure that all possibilities of Vision coming back were completely erased. And so Quiz and Viz and Diz are all three completely dead. and there's really no chance of them coming back. And there's this ending. There's really no words for this. I thought about adding dialogue to this scene. Something like maybe... I wasn't even thinking of having Smiley hug Phil at the end. I was just thinking of having her say, "Hey, do you want to come over to my house and play video games sometime," or something? And then Phil would smile. I really wanted Phil to smile, because you almost never see him with a mouth at all, and he's never smiled visibly before, so... For him and Smiley to be together, it only made sense for him to have a smile. But then I took the video game idea and just translated it into this picture, and I figured that the cutscene didn't need any words. So I just left it without. Here's Phil growing up. I made this music for the credits before... There's Zach, by the way. Made the music for these credits before I had Sorry, I'm just looking through this again. Memories. I made the music and the credits before the final section of the game where you stop Quiz and Diz and... Well, you stop Diz with Quiz, and made this before the part where Phil and Smiley hug. I knew that I wanted Phil and Smiley to get together as an excuse to finish the series with the final picture that you see after the credits. I just didn't know how to do it exactly. And, oh, this music. I mean, I cried making this music, mostly the very end of it. Because this was going to be the end, and it is the end. Yeah, this is the moment I cried. This part. Oh. And there they are. Happy as can be. And then right here, when the static picks back up again, I realized that throughout the entire series, there's been static for seemingly no reason. But you hear rewinding there, and the reason that there was static that showed up on every screen in the first game was because it was just the way that I knew how to stop certain visual glitches, like... I didn't know how to program a game to where you could enter a room with an item you already collected and not have that item show up for one frame before it goes away again. And so I put the static there to just hide the fact that that happened. But in this final game I decided, you know what, maybe that static is there for a reason, and I decided to make that reason that this whole series is recorded on tape. And then you hear the rewinding like it's a VHS tape. And it's not actually necessarily a tape, but it's at least a way of tying everything together. So, that's it. I feel in my heart that this is the place to end the whole series. And part of my reason for saying that is Phil's story is kind of my own, and when Phil, in the first game, was, you know, this brash student who just... he made snarky comments and got away with it, and that was basically his character. That was who I was at the time when I made that game, basically. I was trying to be that kind of person. And now I want to be a better person than that. I want to be a person who maybe is humorous with snarky comments, but for the most part tries to be positive and has a better impact on people, and just... I feel like I'm a different person now than I was, and I wanted Phil to reflect that with his character, since Phil is kind of a self-insert for me. And with the end of Phil's story in this game, with him growing old, that's also kind of like me saying that I'm ready to be over with this series. Like, he's old now, he's had his life, it's time to move on. So, people have suggested that I make another game or another series of games in which Phil and Smiley have a kid and then you play as the kid or the kids, and I'm not going to do that. And there are a few reasons that I'm not going to do that, partly because I'm very much done with this series. I've wanted to be done with it for a long time. I also am already making a game where the protagonist of it is a lot like if Phil and Smiley were put together, and so if Phil and Smiley ever had a kid, I'm already making a game about a character that would be similar to that. And it's not a Riddle School game in any way, but I feel like if people enjoy those characters, they'll enjoy this character that I already have. And also, I kind of feel like if Riddle School and if Phil is kind of like a representation of me and my story, then Phil's children should be represented by the children of the series, and that would be the fans of the series. So, in other words, if you want to see a game with Phil and Smiley's kids, that's up to the fans now. It's their game to make. It's up to your imaginations to see where the series could go. Because in my heart, I really feel like this is the definitive place for the series to end. It's the end of my story, and Phil's story, and now it's your story. But I don't see this as a bad thing, because ultimately I have to make what I want to see in the world, and I feel like that should be anyone's goal. I don't see this as the end of my game development, because I always want to make new games, and the spirit of Riddle School will live on no matter what, whether it be in fan games or just in the style of humor and puzzles that I have in future projects. It might be bittersweet, but the series will have its legacy. So thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you in whatever is next.